begin with me, please, with a moment of prayer. Blessed Lord, we are so very grateful for this opportunity that we have to gather together as friends and as family in this church together, to worship you, to study your word, and to grow together. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I've watched from afar. I get the emails every week, and I know the wonderfully exciting things that are happening in this church under Anne's strong leadership. And it's very exciting to see, sometimes very frustrating, and I can't be here. I want to be here every week. I've talked to the Dean of Harvard about moving campus closer to New Jersey, but we're really attached to Cambridge, and I'm going to keep trying. But knowing that there would be a lot of new faces here to me, that means that I'm a new face. I see so many familiar faces, though, it warms my heart. But I knew that there would be a lot of people for whom my face is new. And you might be sitting there thinking, who is this guy? Why is he here? So anticipating that, I titled my sermon, Who Am I? Why Am I Here? So for those of you who do know me, you know that I've been in school for a long time. I started seminary with Anne, and I'm still going. And it's been 8.5 years, and I have at least 3 or 4 more years before I just move into a different spot in the classroom, basically. But if I were to boil all of that education down and try to get to the essence of it and say what it's all about, I think it would all come down to these 2 questions. Who am I, and why am I here? Different disciplines answer these from different perspectives. Certainly, philosophy deals with them pretty much in that form. Theology says, who are we in relation to God? Who is God in relation to us? And what is our calling and our mission? Psychology and psychiatry answer them in terms of identity and purpose. Definitely in pastoral ministry, when Anne or Barb or anybody is sitting with a person one-on-one who's going through a time of need and struggle, those are struggles of identity after dealing with loss, after dealing with marriage or birth of a child. All of these are stresses upon our notion of who we are and what our purpose is. So I want to try and tackle these 2 questions today from 4 different perspectives. First, beginning with this personal identity that we all struggle with and ways that we might go about that. Then looking at the text that we have before us today, this wonderfully powerful text from Exodus 3, and which we'll look at from these 2 questions from Moses' perspective and also from God's perspective. And then finally, think about how these questions confront us today at First Congregational Church of Montclair, and this powerful growth that we're going through and this reshaping of our identity and thinking about who we are and why we are here. So in terms of personal, who am I and why am I here? Well, I'm Brad. I'm here because Anne invited me to come. Well, actually, Anne invited me to come last week, but I sort of weaseled my way into an invitation for this week, so I'm very grateful for that. And but when I think about dealing with this question more profoundly, I try to break it up into 3 parts in terms of past, present, and future. So we all construct our identity in these ways, right? We think about who we are as the tradition that we've received, our gender, our cultural heritage, our ethnicity, our historical background. So I'm a descendant of Irish and Irish immigrants and Native American descendants. And that is very much a part of who I am. That's part of my identity. And many of you know that I've been very touched and influenced by Ghanaian culture. There's a proverb, really a prayer in Ghana. It goes something like this: I pray to you, my ancestors. I pray to you for love, for strength, support, and guidance. Because in this moment, right now, as I confront this major decision in my life, this decisive moment, all that you've lived for, all that you've fought for, everything that you worked for comes down to this moment. So I ask for your help and your guidance, because your very purpose in being comes down to me right now. Now, at first blush, that might sound like a very arrogant, self-centered prayer, that everything's all about me right now. Another way to look at it is that our ancestors, our mothers and fathers, grandfathers and forefathers have worked to shape this world in which we live, to create this opportunity in our lives. They've worked and toiled towards particular objectives, and it now falls to us to either continue those traditions, to bring them to fruition, to cull the weeds out of those traditions and take out the good and nurture take out the bad and nurture the good. Or we might go a different direction, but it all comes down to us. So there's a tremendous responsibility that we've inherited from the past. But of course, I'm much more than just my mother's son, my father's son. I'm also my own person, and I have unique opportunities and freedoms to shape myself and to make myself right now. So in terms of the present, I think of myself, my own identity, in terms of a map of relationships, or a web. So those who are closest to me are very much a part of my own identity. My wife, Elizabeth, my children, my immediate family, my church family, and all of these shape who I am. When someone in my life is going through a difficult time, it shapes who I am. When they are having joys, that shapes who I am. Then finally, I also think about identity in terms of the future. The person that I strive to be, the minister that I strive to be, the teacher that hopes to make a difference in this or that student's lives. And of course, in terms of my children, my greatest charge and my greatest responsibility is to create an atmosphere where they can grow and nurture and perhaps make this world a better place in their own way. So when we start to think about identity in that sort of past, present, and future, especially when we think about the future, then that Ghanaian proverb comes back again with a different twist. Because now it's not that all my ancestors have lived just for this one moment. It's my decision. But now I am living for a future moment that will only find its fruition in the next generation. So I have that responsibility to inherit and nurture what I've received, but also to pass along great opportunities for those who come after me. So when I think about these responsibilities and this identity, personal identity, I find that the second question, why am I here, is not any different than who am I? Our purpose is our identity, and our identity is our purpose. These are not separate and distinct questions. They are inseparably linked. So turning now to this passage, I was telling Bob and Elaine that I honestly think I'm not exaggerating when I say that there is no passage in the entire Bible about which more theology has been written than Exodus 3, 1 through 15. It may not ring in the sanctuary as the most pinnacle passage in the Bible, but man, theologians love to discuss it. And I think we could easily fill this entire sanctuary floor to ceiling, front to back, with texts that have been written about these 15 verses, and 90% of that would be about verse 14, that I am who I am has sent you, and the various ways of reading that. But I want to try and defamiliarize this text a little bit, and sort of step away from all of that, and step away from the burning bush and everything that comes into that, and think about what is happening in this passage as a whole. What do we see? What's the dialogue? And how do these questions, who am I and why am I here, play out in this, particularly in relation to Moses and to God? So we see Moses walking along, minding his own business, taking care of his sheep, and all of a sudden he sees a burning bush, and he says, oh well, that's kind of weird, and it's burning, but it's not burning. So he goes to investigate, and then all of a sudden God comes into the bush, so it's this interesting chronology. We don't quite expect that order of things. And then God says, remove your shoes because you're on sacred ground. I feel awkward actually walking with my shoes on the labyrinth, which is such a sacred space that you are all creating here. And Gregory of Nyssa, who's an early theologian, really reads a lot into the symbolism of that, removing our shoes, that we have to remove all of our preconceptions of God. If we really want to come and meet God, then we have to come naked, come without expectations. Otherwise, we just see God as a mirror, and we see ourselves and what we want to see. But if we really come without any preconceptions, by leaving our shoes outside of this sacred space, then we are able to meet God. And then what happens here? So God begins by saying to Moses, after remove your shoes, by identifying God's self, by saying, this is who I am. And God identifies God's self in three different ways. By first saying, I am the God of your ancestors. I am the God of the past. I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. So this is my cultural, ethnic lineage. This is how I'm associated with you. And this is where we're come from. Then God says gives a present identity. So I am here because I have heard the calls, I've heard the cries of the Israelites in Egypt who are enslaved and oppressed. I've heard their calls right now. They're crying right now. They're suffering right now. And that's why I am here. So it's not only immediate, but it's also relational. So God has this relationship with these people, and God has this relationship with Moses. And that's why I've come, because it's about the future. I've come here to send you to liberate them. I've come here to send you to alleviate their cries and to respond to their suffering. So we have this notion of identity mixed with purpose. That God identifies God's self as the God who has this particular history, but is here right now because of these relationships and because of the suffering and the oppression that's going on in Egypt. And it is here right now to send Moses to respond to that suffering. So Moses has this notion of purpose, of why God is here and what Moses' purpose is. Moses' response is, I think, interesting then. Having received this call, he doesn't say, oh, okay, and goes. His response is to ask, who am I? Who am I that you've chosen me to do this thing? Why didn't you choose someone else? There must be something about me. So tell me, who am I? And it's a very interesting thing. We think of that question, who am I, as introspective, as something we ask ourselves. We don't generally think about asking someone else or asking God that question, because we don't want others to define ourselves. We want the freedom to define ourselves. But Moses goes and asks God, who am I? And what is God's response? It's also very interesting. God responds by saying, I'm with you. I am with you. So imagine I went and I asked Anne, who am I? And she responded by saying, well, you're the person I'm with. Okay. Thanks, Anne. That's an interesting way to respond. Of course, it means a little bit more when it's God who's with us. No offense. And but then Moses' next question is, well, who are you? Okay, so I asked you, who am I? And you said, I'm with you. Okay, well then who are you? And God's response is, I'm the one who's heard the calls of the Israelites. I'm the one who's heard the suffering and the cries from these people who are oppressed. And I'm the one who's come here to be with you. And I will be with you because you are going to go to Egypt to respond to these cries and to liberate the oppressed. So we see these notions of identity that are immediately relational. It's God, who Moses is his relationship to God. And who God is God's relationship to Moses and to the oppressed. And Moses is the one who's called to liberate the oppressed. So it's all about the suffering, the oppression, and the liberation. And that is God's role and purpose, and that's Moses' role and purpose. So if we could think finally about our notion of, we could think about these questions. Who are we at First Congregational Church? And who are we? What is our mission? So we have to think about, first of all, our past, the traditions that we've received. We know that some of them aren't good. We know that some of them are traditions that we would like to forget, histories that we would like to overlook, things that we would like to change and move in new directions. And we have the freedom to do that, although it's not always easy to do so. But we also have such rich traditions, including this passage from Exodus 3, that we need to nurture and call and think about how we're going to and make this a part of our lives. So we can read this passage from Exodus 3, as history. This is something that happened. This is a record of the events that happened long ago. We could read it that way. I'm not sure that there's anything wrong with reading it that way. But we could also read this as sort of a template of how relationships work, of how identity and purpose work, and particularly for this church. So we begin asking, who am I? But we don't ask it to ourselves, and we don't even ask it to one another, but we ask God, who are we? And God's response, if we're listening, if we come with our shoes off, should be, I'm with you. And when we hear that, we should say, well, who are you? And God will tell us, I am the God who has heard the calls of the oppressed. I am the God who's heard those who are suffering and those who are in need. And that's why I'm with you. And that's why I will be with you, so long as we hear those calls. So we ask ourselves these questions, particularly at this time of reshaping and rethinking who we are at First Congregational Church of Montclair. So we ask, who are we and why are we here?